little music to start with, because I can't believe in 1 week's time we will be finishing up our season of Brighter Days Through Better Movement. We started this season in late January, in some of those dark times. I think it was late January. And here we are today, almost at the longest day of the year. And I am joined by a colleague, a physical therapist, a performance physical therapy, to celebrate the sunshine and the improving atmosphere that we're all living in these days. And I am joined by Kelly Dowd. Kelly, it's great to have you here.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's so great to see people's smiling faces, and not that I didn't get to see your face on Zoom without a mask, but now in real life we can do that as well. So we've come a long way in the last year and a half, a long way. All of us have dealt with some challenges, but all of us have learned some new things and found things to fill our time in our lives when we were unable to travel or were quarantined and all of those things. I know that you've been doing some really interesting things, and I'd love you to share with our viewers and our listeners out there. Tell us what new hobbies, new tasks, what new pastimes that you have done since the pandemic.
Yes, I'd love to share. So I continued a lot of my kind of regular practices, which one of my big ones is yoga. So I'll talk a lot about that today. But some of the new things I got into have been more of the outdoor things. We started some like little tiny farming type things. So I got chickens this year during the shutdown. We got bees this past spring. So now I have a beehive, and then I created a little more garden space. So it's almost like I have a little tiny farm in my backyard that I've been taking care of while also continuing to stay active and practice yoga and get outside.
Well, I love the outside component, and my mind is buzzing with questions, especially to do with bees. And have you taken care of bees before, or like, why did you decide to get bees? How did that come about?
No, I have not taken care of bees before. I still feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, actually, when I open the hive and I look at them and I say, oh, well, I guess they're doing something. So been watching a lot of videos and like reading books on it. But sort of just as we were getting more plants and starting to do more gardening and having more flowers planted, we were like, hey, it'd be a really great idea to get some bees to pollinate all this stuff. So we kind of took a quick little free course online and then just got really interested in it from there and bought a hive. And now here we are, hoping that they eventually make some honey.
So how long does it take for a hive of bees to start making honey?
So it takes them a while to get established. It's actually really interesting. You buy, like, the queen is sort of separate from the rest of the group at first, and then she becomes integrated with the initial group of bees. And once they like take her on as the queen, she kind of starts laying eggs and reproducing initially. So mostly they're building up, reproducing, creating more bees. And then they start sort of going out collecting pollen, food, all of that stuff, and they build up food storage and they build up their home essentially. So it takes a while because they're using all of the materials to build at first. And then hopefully either by fall or next year, like after a full year, then we'll probably have some honey that's usable.
It's so interesting. And my final question, how many times have you been stung?
Not at all. We open it every week. I have the crazy hat and everything. I don't know. I think there was a picture of that at one point, but I have like this little hat with a net over it. But I have not at all. None of us, actually. It's me and my fiance open it together. And then one of our old past roommates from several years ago, one of our good friends, was interested in going in on it with us. So he comes every week to help us open the hive and check it out. So the three of us, none of us have been stung at all. So should knock on wood or something.
Do you find there's a whole lot of bees flying around in your garden or not so much?
Yeah, they've been kind of flying around all over the place. So it's interesting as they come and go, they sort of have like specific pathways that they follow where they know where the like food and nectar locations are. And they kind of have these weird things that they do to tell each other where those locations are by like buzzing around in certain directions. It's really interesting. But so they kind of are going right now to some of the things that we have flowering in the yard. So some of our flowers, trees that have flowers on them, etc. So kind of all over the place, but yeah.
So interesting. Also, for people who are out there listening, I would love you to let us know you're there, because if you do, you will go into our drawing today. We are giving away one of our massive big Yeti bottles, our 36-ounce Performance PT Yeti bottles. You can also sign up at performanceptri.com/live. You'll go into the drawing, and then you'll also be in the drawing for next week. Also, you can also on that site get to see our past episodes where you can hear other colleagues, other people from performance talk about what they did during the COVID. And we've had people making kombucha. We've had people who started rollerblading, but they're all these different things, which I think is really super interesting. My new rollerblades just arrived in the mail 2 days ago as a response. And maybe next week I'm going to have some bees. We'll see. But I am going to look into it. So for those out there listening, please tell us who you are, where you are. Tell us what you have learned or what you've done differently, new hobbies you've taken up. And now let's get on to the really important part is movement. Movement is a big part of ensuring that we're healthy, happy. I love that you're outside. We all know the impact of sunshine, real light on our overall well-being, the vitamin D, helping with our sleep cycle, our mental wellness, and all of that. But let's get into the thing that I consider an expert at is yoga. And for those who don't know, there's a whole YouTube channel that we filmed and did when COVID first hit, that Kelly had a couple of days a week live yoga classes that allowed all of the people in the community to look for different ways to stay active through these difficult times. So speak a little bit, Kelly, there's different kinds of yoga, there's different philosophies, there's different reasons for doing it. Can you give the audience out there, more like global, tell us about your yoga philosophies, the type you do, why you do it, to help draw maybe some questions. Because again, any questions people have out there specific to yoga especially, we would love to hear them. Well, Kelly would, because then she can answer them.
Yes, I would. Yeah, so I do practice actually several different kind of styles of yoga movement practice. But I find too that I've been turning, especially in pandemic times, to some of the more philosophy and mindfulness components of our yoga practice. So people kind of, when they think of yoga, they only think of shapes and poses, which is definitely a huge, huge, huge part of it and a big part of my practice. But at the same time, I think it's a lot of application of how to apply mindful principles to our movement as a whole, so that we're not just sort of mindlessly moving our bodies into shapes. So I think that's the really big key component of yoga that I love to practice is being mindful, kind of thinking about where your body is in space and how it's feeling, so that you can kind of figure out what's working, what's not working, especially, in the field that I work in with injuries. So helping people figure out what is going to be the most beneficial for them for their specific scenarios. So
I like how you mentioned, I like the term that you use, mindful movement, because obviously yoga comes to mind when you think of mindfulness, but I would assume that mindfulness, it can cross over to any kind of physical activity you're doing, whether it is beekeeping or rollerblading or running or doing strength training. Having that mental awareness of where your body is in time and space is actually a really positive and healthy place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that kind of the historically yogic principle of mindfully moving can be applied to any scenario, and really you can get more out of it mentally and physically if you kind of apply it to anything that you do.
There's someone out there who's like, I don't know, Kelly, what on earth are you talking about when you say mindful? Is this kooky, incense playing? Is this about meditation and humming? Can you speak a little bit more about someone who has no idea what we're talking about? Help clarify what mindfulness really is.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of different, I think, ways that you can look at it. The way that I like to sort of think about mindfulness is just kind of finding ways to be more aware of what is happening where you're in the present moment. So a lot of us kind of live in a world where we're thinking about our to-do lists or things that we need to do that day or what's next or our schedule or what's happening tomorrow, or we're sort of lingering on things in the past and like, oh, did I respond well to that? What about that scenario? We think about situations for a long period of time. And I think if we can apply mindfulness more as an idea of, okay, what am I doing right now? It's not involving my future or my past. It's right now. Let me be really aware of what I'm thinking about, how I feel emotionally, maybe how my body's feeling, where's there tension, stress, things like that. Just to get a better idea of how we can really connect to being a little bit more in that moment instead of sort of existing in those future and past worlds. It's not necessarily about humming or meditating or anything like that, really, just like trying to be intentional about whatever the task is, even if it's like something like brushing your teeth or doing your dishes. You can kind of really be mindful about the exact motion that you're doing, the things that are going on in your head right at that moment, instead of creating your to-do list for the next day while you're brushing your teeth, if that makes sense.
You know, I was actually I think you did a great job. And I was actually listening to a podcast or listening to something yesterday, and it spoke about how our brains are not made to multitask, yet we expect them to. Now, when I mean multitask, I don't mean like, you know, we can't walk and talk at the same time. Of course, we can walk and talk at the same time, but we can do a much better things if we are in the moment. Okay, if I'm sitting working, I'm focusing on that work, and every once in a while I can think about my body and think, okay, is there any tension? How do I feel? Blah, blah, blah. But think about that one thing at a time, rather than as I'm working it, I'm going to think about what I'm going to do tomorrow and what's on my to-do list and what did I forget to do. Like, schedule time out to think about those other things, but don't try to do it all at one time.
Right. Exactly. I 100% agree with that.
What would some tips be for those who are thinking about yoga itself? I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who are saying, I don't have time to suddenly do yoga. You know, I'm a runner, or I like to lift weights, or, you know, I like to play golf. And then you suddenly mention this word yoga. Why would I do yoga, and how should I incorporate it into what I do, or how could I?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I'm a big advocate of not necessarily having to take an hour out of your day to do a yoga class, or you know, even an hour and 10 minutes, or go to a physical class or things like that. I think it can be fairly easily incorporated into a regular workout, golfing, bowling, whatever kind of routine you have. I think it encompasses more than just that idea of stretching that people kind of always think about. So I think the concept of being mindful in your movement can be applied to these other things. But if you wanted to just start kind of your own practice, maybe thinking about it in a way to improve your mobility and your flexibility and your sort of ability to move through your full motions, so that you can kind of prepare for the thing that you're doing next. So if you're doing golf, maybe thinking of like sort of a yoga-based warm-up type of thing. So a couple poses that you might include before you go golfing, to be able to ready your body, not necessarily stretch it, but see if you can move it in a mindful way that incorporates the mobility that you might require for that task. So maybe it's 5 minutes before or after certain things, kind of setting yourself up to be intentional with it. Maybe even sometimes incorporating deep breathing with it can be really useful. So I think there are a lot of ways that you could incorporate it. And of course, there is the option to take a class or go on YouTube and kind of see what applies to you. Various styles are out there: chair yoga, gentle yoga, flow yoga. I think starting off something like gentle yoga, some shorter sessions are usually a good kind of starting point to figure out if it's for you or not. And then once you kind of learn some of those things, maybe taking a few of the poses that you're like, oh, I really felt good when I did that, and incorporating them into your movement routine before or after the other things that you do.
So now I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to pick 3 spring summer activities. I'm going to pick out golf, running. I always have to pick out running, and let's say gardening.
Yeah.
And for each of those, and you can cross over a little bit, Poor Kelly, she's like going, oh my goodness, Michelle, you could have prepped me for this, but
No,
I've got this.
fine.
So I'm like, I'm a golfer, Kelly. I never do yoga, but I know I need to stretch, warm up, all of that.
Yeah.
Can you name 3 different poses that I could do that could actually ultimately help my golf game? And we'll do the same for running, and we'll do the same for gardening.
Yeah. So I think for golf, some of the biggest things that I recommend to people are more spinal twist movements. So even a seated version where you're just rotating to one side, because you need a lot of twisting mobility just to get that golf swing down. The other thing that I like to recommend to people are some hip openers. So something like a pigeon pose. If you haven't seen that, you can Google it. So spinal twists, pigeon pose are definitely 2. Oh, there it is. It's a pigeon pose with me and my dog. So that's a pigeon pose that you can do. But you can also do that seated. I don't really have a ton of room with me here, but if you were to sit and cross your ankle over your thigh, you can kind of, because I'm dropping stuff, figure out a way to do that. So kind of a figure 4 type of stretch. And then I think the other thing that can be really good for golf actually is starting to practice maybe some balancing poses. So something like a tree pose to get a little bit more of that balancing act going on, so that when you're shifting your weight all into the one leg, sort of the end of the swing, you're able to shift the weight a little bit more easily by having it on that one side of your pelvis and your spine. So something like a tree pose, I think, would be really great for golf.
I love those. I've got golf, spinal twist, pigeon pose, and the tree pose. So people who don't now, go ahead and Google them.
Google it. Exactly.
You've probably seen them. They'll be familiar, and breathe through them. Do them before, do them afterwards.
Totally.
You may be able to find you can take a few strokes off that game if you do.
Yeah.
Kelly wants to hear.
Absolutely. And I think it helps too, like if you carry over, if you did start with those 3 and kind of practice your breathing with it and carry over your mindful breathing into your golf game, you can even potentially improve that way. So that's a good one. So what was the other one you said? Running?
Yep.
Okay. So running is a little bit still, I would incorporate some of the same things. But instead of a pigeon, I might try like a lunge type of pose, or like a lizard lunge, which is a low lunge, to work on the hip flexor. So kind of stretching a little bit through the hip flexor, even something like it's called a half split. It sounds scary, but it's not a real split. So don't worry too much about it. A half split is more for your hamstrings. So kind of thinking about now, since we came away from golf where it's a lot of twisting, our running game is a little more forward backwards. So thinking about those forward and backward muscle groups. So more hitting kind of the hamstrings, hitting the hip flexors. So something like a lizard lunge, something like a half split would be good for those. But I also think a twisting lunge type of motion would be good to try to kind of get a little bit of that pelvic rotation, because you still have a little bit of twistiness going on. So kind of opening up and moving mindfully through those things would be really beneficial, I think, for runners.
I love it. And I think you bring up a really great point that golfing's a lot of rotation. So it's one instead of this plane, whereas running is a lot of this, what we call a sagittal plane. And that's the nice thing about yoga, is it's this really combination of motions. I often hear people say, I do yoga to stretch. And I like to say to them, well, think of yoga actually is a way that you take every joint, every ligament, every muscle through every different plane or motion, how good that is for your overall mobility. And flexibility comes with that. And as does strength. There's really intense strengthening moves in yoga as well. It's not just stretch and relax. There's a lot of stability that's built through many of those poses.
Yeah, there's definitely, and I think that is just a little sidebar. One of the things that gets a little bit misconstrued in the yoga world is that it's all about stretching, where realistically there are certainly a lot of poses that involve stretching and flexibility, but you can make them really active just by creating a little bit more pressure into your hand or pressure into your foot, or a little squeezing through your thighs, things like that, to create stability at the same time. So there's a lot of different ways that you can change your yoga practice to address both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The last one, gardening. So here's a combination of both.
Yes, gardening. So yes, and I've been out in my own garden a lot. So the thing that I've been doing the most actually in my own garden is a squat pose, like a malasana. So it's like a deep squat. So the same as you would think of like a deep squat in weightlifting, like an overhead squat. So you kind of go, legs are wide, sitting fairly low. So I've been doing a lot of deep squatting to get comfortable on the ground. But some other things, there's something called a gate pose, which is also like one knee down, almost like a sideways lunge. So you can kind of work a little bit of the more, we talked about forward, backward, rotation, but now thinking a little bit about the sideways reaching too. So you can kind of get into those funky places when you reach to the side, get your hips into funny positions with your knee down. So that's a really good one. I think that can be useful for gardening. And the other thing I was thinking just similarly is some stuff with like a side bend. So maybe a warrior one, or just a regular standing side bend pose to try to get a little bit more of that sideways reaching motion is really good for gardening as well.
I'm certainly not a yogi like you, Kelly, but I love it when you take the time to learn about yoga and understand the poses. It teaches you a lot about your body and how to manage it.
Yeah.
And you take a lot of the things you learn and then you can incorporate them into what you do. So when you suddenly do start gardening in the spring and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to get off the ground when I've been down eating for, 20 minutes? You start to be even more mindful of the positions you assume and understanding the different yoga poses and know that, okay, when I am gardening, I'm going to make sure I'm in this position or that position. And so just making you more, I think yoga just helps to continue to teach you to be more mindful. It sounds like you have a listener out there, Taylor, is looking forward to you teaching a class to the therapist over at Arnold.
Yeah, she's another one of our therapists here, so I'll definitely have to teach a class to you guys.
So Kelly,
we can help our patients.
Exactly. So people who are out there thinking about yoga, are there any sort of resources, or where would you tell them to? What would you tell them to do? Like, do it. Look for certain online classes. Go to some local facilities. Is there any particular ones that are your favorites that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I actually haven't been to too many of the local spots in Rhode Island. I did really enjoy all of the classes I've been to, though, around Rhode Island have been great. So I haven't really run into any problems with any teachers. There seems to be fairly good training programs here that are creating really well taught, well thoughtful teaching. So I think you could pretty much go almost anywhere. I teach in Central Massachusetts, so of course I'm a little bit more biased towards my own studio where I'm a faculty member and I teach them the training too. So I'm kind of well, that's my spot. But there are plenty of available things online as well. So I hear a lot of my patients, and I've done a few classes with her, is one of the most accessible ones, and she's fairly popular now, is Yoga with Adrienne. Mm-hmm. She does a good job kind of keeps with a starting point of kind of being gentle with a lot of things. I think our YouTube channel is a really good place to start too. If you're I haven't done any of this, I don't know what to do. All of the stuff that I taught during the pandemic was say 15 or 20 minutes of chair yoga, and it covered a lot of different movements, some strengthening, some mobility. So I think if you're ooh, I don't know, even a 15, 20 minute chair yoga class can be better than nothing, especially if you're sitting in an office all day. Take a quick break, get a couple movements in, it can be really useful. So those are some really good places to start, but really kind of asking questions if you're going to a studio, looking at the style of classes, thinking about, do you want something that's a little more challenging? Do you want something that's a little more low key? And just asking them kind of what levels of class they teach. Is it gentle? Is it more intense? Is it power yoga? And just deciding what you're kind of looking for out of your yoga practice.
What's the name of the practice that you work out of and teach out of, Kelly?
Yeah, so it's I work at Hot Power Yoga Center. That's where I'm a faculty member doing trainings. So if you're interested in our yoga teacher training too, we start another one in the fall. So we always have a group every year that goes through. So they learn all their anatomy from me. So it's really fun. So I teach there just twice a week right now. So, but it's heated and it's power yoga, so it can be a little bit intense. We kind of get a little bit more of a athlete type of group there, but there are a lot of places locally that teach a lot of gentle beginner classes, chair yoga classes, things like that. So definitely just kind of doing your research and just Googling local gentle yoga usually will come up with some good ones.
Well, it's nice to see. Oh, there we go. The Hot Power Yoga Center. So for those folks who want to actually go and sweat and work out really hard, there is where you go. But it's nice to see that there's the extremes. You know, I hear sometimes, oh, yoga's too easy or yoga's too hard.
Yep.
And I would challenge any of those people. I mean, it's kind of like walking and running. You can, take a relaxed, slow walk and feel good, or you can sprint or run a marathon.
Yes.
There is those extremes when it comes to yoga. So it is something that can be accessible to anyone.
Yeah.
Obviously, yoga and beekeeping are not the only things that you're doing for exercise these days, Kelly.
No.
Plus, as these days get longer and we reach the summer solstice, which is coming up soon, what other things do you do for exercise?
Yeah. So this year, actually, another thing that we got was a rowing machine, a beginner's version of rowing machine. It was like a cheap one on Amazon because I know nothing about rowing. So you'll have to have another podcast so I can learn about that from somebody else. So that's been interesting because it's a totally new movement that I'm not used to. So I've been trying that a couple of days a week, doing some like high intensity interval training videos that are really quick, short workouts. But I just love doing a lot of stuff when I can outside, if it's not too hot or too rainy, walking my dog when he wants to go for a walk. He's so cute and loves to walk. Getting outside for trail walks, hikes, running a little bit, and then doing a lot of kayaking. I pulled my kayaks out finally, rinsed them off, and we'll hopefully get out on real water. So that's part of the impetus too of my rowing machine. Is like maybe I'll get better at kayaking, but I don't know if it's crossed over yet.
I would definitely. The rowing's an interesting one. In the fall, actually, when I was thinking of new stuff, I took rowing lessons at Narragansett Boat Club, which was awesome, and I would highly recommend to anyone.
Oh, awesome!
And gave me I did have to get up early in the morning, but it was really amazing to get out on the water and try again something new and being out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I do love kayaking all summer, so I figured, let me try to figure out how to row too inside when it's not so nice. So it's working out. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see who is going to win this big Yeti today. Sarah's going to come on and do our drawing. For those who want to be in to win next week, remember to go to performanceptri.com/live. Sarah, who is today's lucky winner?
Our winner is Janet Heberlin.
Okay. Congratulations, Janet.
Congratulations.
We will be reaching out to make sure you have that. And to let everyone know, next week is our last week of this series, and we are joined by Michelle Filecki. I said her name right. Yeah. Michelle Filecki will be meeting with Michelle Colley, and we will be getting into tips for good gardening. So I look forward to that because it is a great time of the year to be gardening, and we will be giving away a Echo sound system, I think, on that show. So, there we go. Thank you, Sarah. There we go. An Amazon Echo we will be giving away next week. So again, go and log in, join us, especially if you want to hear about gardening. It will be fun to discuss that. Kelly, well, first of all, I'll say any final questions out there, now is your time to ask or forever hold your peace. For those people who are listening and you have questions about yoga, Kelly Dowd, K-Dowd at performanceptri.com. Please feel free to reach out to Kelly, not only a physical therapist, but a yoga teacher and a trainer. So I think that's a pretty amazing combination and really valuable, not just to our colleagues, but to our patients as well. Kelly, the last 15 seconds of advice, or 10 seconds, I always give you a little extra. What's the advice that you have for our listeners?
I think just finding something that you love to do and keeping moving, being mindful and intentional about it, both in exercise and kind of life. And then regularly taking time out of your schedule for yourself and your health and your well-being and your stress management. I think finding stuff that you just love and keep up with it.
Love it.
Yeah.
Messages, Kelly. Thank you so much. And for all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. And I really hope everyone's enjoying these brighter days, keeping cool because it is bright, and utilizing movement to get to that, to reach their destination. Thanks, Kelly.
Yes, thank you.